Good morning. I see the notes here from somebody who was here before me. It says recovering European. I'm David Madera, the talk show host from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I want to apologize. I want to start by apologizing to the entire nation. Apparently, the only criteria for being a Democratic candidate for president or vice president now is that you come from Scranton. How many of you heard Hillary talking about her Scranton roots? That's us. We're the area of the country where we were selling our kids into prison for profit. Yeah, that's us. It's where Phelan came to do Frack Nation. Vera Scroggins is one of our very own. But I want to thank Loman Henry for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. How about if our panelists come on up and have a seat? I'm going to dispense with introductions. They are on page 34 in your brochure in the interest of time and to allow them the most time possible. I'm going to ask you to refer to that. Each one of them is distinguished in their own rights. I am a talk show host, as I mentioned, in northeastern Pennsylvania. Our show airs live from 6 to 9 a.m. Every weekday on 94.3 FM, The Talker. We also have an award-winning app for your smartphone. Just get Radio Bold, and anywhere you are in the world, you can listen to my show from 6 to 9 a.m. We also are on iTunes and Stitcher. We podcast. My website has all of our information there. I think it's one of the most comprehensive websites in terms of content next to, say, Rush Limbaugh. I come from northeastern Pennsylvania, and I have some great news. I have some very good news. We're actually winning. Northeastern Pennsylvania has always been a wasteland. I'll give you an example. Phyllis Mundy, a Democrat in a mixed district, held the seat for over 20 years. And when she decided to retire, she was going to follow that time-honored tradition of the legislature, where she handed off her seat to one of her staff members. But thanks to the good work that the folks at CAP did, we were able to replace her with a citizen legislator, Aaron Coffer. So things are beginning to change. Now, Senator Wagner probably doesn't get challenged often on his commitment. But I do, since I test the limits of free speech every day, I'm going to do that. I'm just going to point out that I also took a cue in terms of my style from Fred Anton. But like Senator Stefano, I made the whole commitment. So Senator Wagner, step up your game and join us, make the whole commitment. You know, 240 years ago on this day, how many of you remember? The 18th of April in 75, right? Hardly a man is now known alive. A silversmith mounted his steed to sound the alarm through the colonies. What was his message? Well, that the British regulars, the ruling class of the day, were on their way from Boston to Concord, a distance of less than 20 miles as the crow flies. And what were they going to do? They were going to take away the British colonists. Remember, this is 75. So it wasn't the Americans, it was the British colonists' God-given right to keep and bear arms. Now, Loman and his team have assembled a cadre of modern-day Paul Reveres to serve on the panel this morning. They've been sounding the alarm about the assaults on our rights by the ruling class. And today it's my pleasure to ask them the question that we now wrestle with. Marco Rubio, in his announcement speech, said that if you want to change the decisions you're making, you have to change the people making the decisions. And I echo that. But there's an automatic follow-up question that comes from that. And that is, once you change the people, how do you translate campaign promises into governing action? So I'll start with Leo Nieper from Empower PA, Citizens Alliance of Pennsylvania. CAP has had some remarkable success in this regard, getting folks in. But I also know you have an idea and a plan about how you hold them accountable. Why don't you start by addressing that? Your mic is not on.
All right.
But it will be.
We good?
We are.
One of the big things that we do is we pay pretty close attention to what members of the House and the Senate are doing as far as votes. Because at the end of the day, it's easy to say one thing while you're running for office. We heard Mr. Fun talking about Bill Clinton, who would tell whatever the people who he was with what they wanted to hear and then do whatever he wanted to do anyway.
He may be the best, but he's not the only.
Right, and that's exactly the point. One of the things that we kind of go in assuming is that we're going to need to watch people. No matter how good they are when they go into office, whatever promises they make, being in Harrisburg, just because of the culture, has a tendency to change people. So what we'll do is we'll pay very close attention to what they're actually doing, not just what they're saying. And when we see people kind of straying off of the principles that they espouse to us, we will, it falls to me. I make phone calls and call up members of the House and Senate who we've worked with and say, you know, what are you doing? What's this vote? You know, why did you vote to give money to the, why did you vote in favor of the Hollywood film tax credit? That's just absurd. You know, and we have those conversations with members in the House and Senate, and it's not always comfortable, but it's necessary.
You know, I think that's a really important point. Relationship and then a follow-up contact, an awkward conversation, can lead to accountability. Beth Ann, you've been State Director of Americans for Prosperity, an organization that is not focused on candidates, but really focuses on issues. What are the strategies that you're employing or that you could recommend to grassroots activists to make that transition from, hey, here's my promise, I'm for this, I'm for that, I believe in God and country, to I'm going to vote in a way that reflects that?
When John was talking about how people got influenced and how they make their decisions, you know, people like me, people are going to listen to me if I'm a trusted advocate within my network. And one of the things that AFP really looks at is how do we build those trusted advocates across the state so that when lawmakers are taking action and making decisions, you've got individuals within the community who can pull their group together and say, let's make some phone calls. Let's go talk to our neighbors about what's going on. Let's go to their office and meet with them. So it's really about empowering the voters who have hired them to do the job so that those voters are always paying attention, and then they've got the tools that they need to make sure they're constantly having those conversations, not just with the legislator, but with their neighbors. A lot of us are busy. It's not that easy to be involved and engaged. Things get voted on before we even realized anybody had even been talking about it. And so from AFP, that really is the goal, to build a grassroots army of individuals who are talking to each other, and when they need to get motivated and send in the cavalry, they can do it.
Before we go to Gwen, I want to ask you about the tools that AFP is developing. I think it's an underutilized resource here in Pennsylvania. You had a lot of success in Wisconsin, and we heard earlier from Senator Wagner about Governor Walker,
Right.
But AFP played a large role in that, and I know that that's part of what you're working to do here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, absolutely. There are 34 state chapters now around the state. We've, over the last 18 months at AFP, have hired hundreds of employees, both at headquarters and across the country. Some of those lessons learned in Wisconsin, everything we do is tested and validated. If things aren't working, we'll stop doing it. If it's working, then let's figure out how to put it in place elsewhere. So we've got the benefit of understanding what works around the country and then being able to use that in the different states. And there really is a commitment from the national organization to build long-term infrastructure in every single state to do the kind of work that was done in Wisconsin with that grassroots army.
We're going to come back to that in a little bit because I want to talk to you about how the parties feel about that. I suspect they're not happy sharing that kind of connection with the voters that you have. But you're very connected, Gwen, with the voters as well, and you've been advocating for specific issues. What do you use or what do you do, or how, maybe the question should be phrased like this, vinegar or honey?
That's a good way to put it. We are a little bit different in that we are not a nonprofit. So we are a political action committee. And so we are all the way allowed to be very involved in endorsing candidates and involved in their campaigns. Now, David, I really like to compare the relationship that you have with your elected official with your mother-in-law. So I know, look, let me just say this. I know a guy.
That's awkward.
Listen, I know a guy that was very sick. He went to the doctor. He had 6 months to live. The doctor gave him that bad news. And next thing you know, he's moving in with his mother-in-law. And I said, why are you moving in with your mother-in-law? And he says, because if I live 6 months with my mother-in-law, it's going to feel like forever. So, so I know how you feel about that, or at least how some of you might feel about your mother-in-law. But that relationship with your elected official is very, very similar. Sometimes your mother-in-law, sometimes your elected official, they're the kind of people that maybe you want to avoid at times, right? You definitely do. You want to avoid. And then also, when it comes time for that very hard relationship, there's going to be maybe tension there, maybe even mistrust. So there is sort of a correlation. I like to say with Action of PA, we really like to start at the very, very beginning. So the very beginning is recruiting, talking to the right people, and you find out where they stand on the issues. If they're articulate, you recruit them. You help them to encourage them to run. And then on top of that, besides recruiting, then you help them to be the candidate. Once you want them to be the candidate, listen, every February we go out and we get signatures to help candidates get on the ballot, and it is really, really cold. But those candidates really appreciate the support that we give them by helping them get the required number of signatures. And then I also say, certainly get involved in the campaign. I mean, we are that type of organization where we're allowed to be involved in the campaign, and I encourage individuals to be part of that campaign. Now, at our Action of PA table, we actually have a piece of literature that says how your church can be effective in an election and how you can really get involved in that. So I encourage the folks to avail themselves of that.
I want to follow up on that because I think that's a very important point. You're not trying to build something from nothing. You're trying to tap into existing alliances and organizations and give them an outlet. So you've built the relationship, you've organized, you've gotten involved in the campaign. Now it's time for that accountability call. How do you do that?
Okay, well, again, I also say that we want to be proactive, just like your relationship with your mother-in-law, okay? I mean, if you're, starting to think about misunderstanding here, you want to be proactive with your mother-in-law and sit down and talk about it, well, I encourage you to be proactive with your elected official as well. So, I mean, we look over the bills that are in Harrisburg. What bills do you think that you would want to support? Maybe there's a bill that you really are opposed to. That's when we say, set up an appointment. Now, when you go to that appointment, when you talk to your mother-in-law, you're polite, right? When you go to that appointment with your elected official, you want to be polite as well.
Right, but let's say that doesn't work. Do you kick your mother-in-law out?
I think that you need to decide. You need to look at all of those issues, and you look at the issues. Is this issue a deal breaker? We don't agree. Look. When I talk to my husband, I don't agree on everything. So when I talk to my elected official, I'm not going to agree.
Your husband agrees with everything you say. Yes, dear.
So, but really, I think that you have to look at the issue. Is this issue a deal breaker? Are you going to sever this relationship? Or is this an issue that maybe you can put aside for now?
Okay.
So, but definitely you want to focus on the most important issues.
All right. Leo, ESPN host Stephen A. Smith, at a private meeting, I don't know if you saw this, he urged blacks to mass defect to the GOP just for one cycle. He said that this will force the Democrats and the Republicans not to take the black vote for granted. The Republicans, conservatives, have a similar challenge. Our only apparent outlet is the Republican Party. How do we avoid, as conservatives, becoming codependent on the Republican Party?
Well, I guess that's kind of a tough question because one of the things that we're willing to do organizationally when we take a look at some of these Republicans who we have, particularly in the southeastern part of the state. Bucks County is particularly awful. Anybody from Bucks County? Montgomery County, same difference. It's pretty bad. One of the things that we have to be willing to do, if we are going to challenge somebody in a primary election, which is one of the things that we are very willing to do, sometimes you have to be willing to lose. There's a Gene DiGirolamo, Representative Gene DiGirolamo down in the southeastern part of the state in Bucks County. He wants to now run for Congress. is absolutely awful. He is a toxic presence in the Republican caucus. From our perspective, Barack Obama won his district 60-40. From our perspective, if we were to have a primary challenger, Gene DiGirolamo, beat him in the primary and lose the seat to a Democrat, it would be worth it. Basically, if you think back to the Civil War, when somebody got shot, they would amputate the leg in order to prevent the gangrene from spreading to the rest of the body. There are some members who are gangrene, and you have to be willing to amputate them.
I think they like that. Beth Ann, to the issue of pressure, the honey vinegar thing, one of the reasons that AFP is working so hard to build that network and the infrastructure is so that when a difficult vote comes up, you can inform your members and get them engaged. What are some of the ways that you find most effective to move legislators who you're not ready to cut off yet, but to move them in the right direction?
So the one thing about AFP that's a little bit different from what we're talking about here is we don't do candidate work. So there's no PAC, there's no getting people in particular elected. We really try to focus on those issues. That gives us a chance then to get in front of people who care about those issues regardless of where they are on the political spectrum. And so before the 2014 election, we went down, we knocked on doors across the country. I happened to go down to Louisiana. We weren't telling folks who to vote for, but we wanted them to get out and vote. The number of volunteers down there doing that work, from Democrats to independents to libertarians to Republicans, because the issues at hand crossed all those parties. So that's the first thing, is really finding those issues that really are impactful to a lot of folks. And AFP is focused on some of those general universal principles of small government, low taxes, individual responsibility. So really focusing on the policies and the issues gets us away from some of those landmines that you encounter when you've got relationships with people and when you care about the people who have been elected. We spend a lot of time making phone calls and going door to door. We know that when people are hearing from their neighbors, then they've got a trusted ally there who can give them information about what's going on, you know, whether it's in the local county courthouse or in Harrisburg or in Washington, D.C. So having those door-to-door conversations is really important. We do a lot of phone calling as well. So we'll have volunteers make phone calls into people, say, this is what's going to be voted on. Would you be willing to let us patch you through to talk to your legislator? You know, can we count on you to go out and make sure you're going to make a call because this issue is going to be voted on. We know it's important to you. You just told us that it's important to you. So it's really that individual contact that gets people motivated to take action. Because otherwise people are busy, you know, cooking dinner and picking their kids up.
Yeah.
One of the things that the general public has this big misperception about is that lobbyists, you know, they're in control of everything. Mm-hmm. The only reason lobbyists have the power that they do is because the representatives and senators' constituents have ceded their authority to them. As we pay less and less attention to the folks who are in Harrisburg or Washington, D.C., mm-hmm. Even, you know, county, local government, as we pay less attention to that, someone is going to step into the void. Mm-hmm. And usually the people who step into the void loudest and most vociferously are the ones who have a vested interest in making government bigger and government worse. When you are Wendell Young from the UFCW, any of these public sector union guys are great examples of it. They survive solely on taxpayer dollars. So their primary interest is to make sure that those taxpayer dollars continue to flow to them. When you have someone whose livelihood is dependent on getting more of your money, you better believe they're going to fight to the death for it. Mm-hmm. So as we've stepped back and paid less attention, those are the people who've stepped in. And if we want to change the dynamic, it's everyday people, it's everybody.
The people Hillary's talking to.
The people Hillary
people that Hillary is talking to. All right, we've got to wrap up here. I really appreciate all that you guys have done. I'd like to give each of you just a couple of minutes to think into the future and look into the next 18 months. We have a presidential election coming up here. Of course, there's some important elections going on this primary in the fall. But over the next 18 months, for the average person who doesn't wake up every morning trying to expand government or, secure their job, but instead has a limited amount of time, how should they prioritize that time? What should we as grassroots activists be prioritizing and doing over the next 18 months? And Gwen, we'll start with you.
Okay, so an action, we're definitely going to promote that kind of church contact. All right, so that you go to church and you talk to the person that's sitting next to you. Some statistics say that 23% of Christians voted in that first Barack Obama, John McCain election, and the next presidential election it went up to 25%. So it's very likely that the person sitting next to you on the right side of you at church and the person that's sitting on the left side, they didn't vote. Wow. And at least that they're certainly not involved. They're busy with their families, their jobs, and church. And so you need to start to talk to them, and you need to get them engaged. I think in getting them engaged now, especially in, talk about a judicial race and how important the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is, just talking about how important something like that is, getting them involved in this kind of race then transcends into success next year.
Kind of like what I do on the radio. We take the news and then we begin to have a conversation about the implications of not being involved, that if you don't want to be ruled by those who are stupider than you, then you have to step up and do something. The priority, Leo, for the next 18 months from the perspective of Citizens Alliance in Pennsylvania?
Well, what we're looking at is we have the 2016 elections coming up, so we're already meeting with candidates who are interested in running in 2016. What we're focusing on right now is the budget and some of the overreach that the new governor is doing in terms of just kind of changing laws by executive fiat. I wrote up something on the website about the DEP, particularly the Department of Environmental Protection. People, if you want to stay informed about that, you need to choose your sources. One of the things that we do is we try and make sure that people are aware of the ins and outs of what's going on in Harrisburg politically. So check out our website. We send out 1 or 2 emails a week just to let people know what's going on. Stay informed and talk to your member of the House and Senate. Find out where they're at on the budget. And make your voice heard. One
of the things that, I want to push on this a little bit, because one of the things that Empower PA is sort of well known for is those primary challenges. Yeah. If an activist is feeling like my legislator has consistently failed to uphold my values and I'm ready to get involved, what kind of reception process can they expect from CAP?
We talk to everybody who wants to talk to us about running. We obviously prioritize different races depending upon who the incumbent is, what kind of campaign a challenger can try and put together. But we talk to everybody who walks in the door. And amazingly, we have the bigger problem isn't the number of candidates that we see, it's raising enough money to help all of the candidates that we see.
So a couple millionaires giving you a call wouldn't make you mad?
That'd be super. It's my number on the website if the Koch brothers are out there.
All right, and speaking of the Koch brothers, Beth Ann, if you would share with us the priorities that you see from an organization that really is focused on issues and grassroots, doesn't engage candidates directly, but really works through giving and empowering people. What do you see as the priority for the next 18 months?
So we have 2 lines of action. One, like Leo's group and others, looking at the activity in Harrisburg, making sure that we don't have a blowout budget that makes it even more difficult for the next generation to chart their own path towards whatever vision of success they have. The second is continuing to grow our organization. We see this as a long-term effort to make generational change, to convince people that the ideals of economic freedom, individual freedom, and responsibility are the right path for America. We were more successful when we lived those out than we have been over the last several decades when we've decided that government is the only solution to any of our problems. So, building that long-term infrastructure across the state, having those one-on-one conversations with people who are probably aligned with us, but they don't even know it because nobody's ever talked to them about these issues in this way.
That's a really important point, and we'll close with that. And thank you, Gwen and Leo and Beth Ann. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. We'll close with that. The responsibility, this is something that I tell my audience often. It's very easy to, point at that recalcitrant congressman or that state representative who doesn't seem to be standing up for and representing, taking a courageous stand for our values. But the fact of the matter is that it's really up to us, that we have to build that base of support across a broad spectrum, and not just our friends, not just the people that we know well, but engage people who we disagree with in thoughtful conversations. I say that because I've seen some of your Facebook posts. Thoughtful conversations that are honey rather than vinegar. Yeah. And I'm very optimistic about the rise of the grassroots movement. I've always been involved in politics since I was 13. I was holding to sign up for Ronald Reagan. And up until just a few years ago, one of the things that was universally true about the candidates that I picked in primaries was that they lost. I'm not kidding. They lost, and it's been a surprise to me, and it's been very encouraging to me as a guy who my wife calls deliriously optimistic, that I'm beginning to see folks that I like win. And that's a huge change. So give yourselves a round of applause because you've made that happen. Thank you. Thank you all.